Hey, I'm Ted Santos, and you know me for straight talk. You know me for talking about life, love, businesses. If you have not already purchased my book, you have to get it on your list and have your significant other read it. Also, the book is called Here's Why You Can't Find Love, and some people have called it sort of like a corporate handbook that applies to your personal life. So, this is part two of a video. And in part one, I talked about why it's so important to be able to understand the good things in your professional life that can be transferred to your personal life. It's not this stuffy, stifling, people have good times at work and you just understand etiquette. Well, there's some other things that happen at work that are that can be very beneficial to your personal life, to your family, to a community, to an entire nation. And that's something called succession planning. Uh, it's a very big, complex subject, and just stay with me on this one. A lot of people may think succession planning is only about preparing another person to fill in as the CEO when your current CEO retires. Or if there's some accident and the CEO, as people say, gets hit by a bus, who's going to step in as CEO? So succession planning is literally training and developing someone to fill the shoes as the CEO when he or she eventually steps out. Except it's really beneficial well beyond just the CEO. So uh, if you think about it, there was a gentleman by the name of Jack Welch, former CEO of General Electric, and he did what people called was a great job at succession planning. He literally took 12 people and said, "You 12 people are candidates to become CEO of GE when I retire." And he trained them in leadership development, and that means he had to coach them up and give them new positions, higher responsibility, higher level jobs, greater responsibility, and that was training those. And eventually, those 12 people, it was whittled down to just three, the top three of those candidates. And by the time it was those three, each of those gentlemen could have been a CEO. But think of it this way: as he takes, in the end, Jeff Immelt won the title of the successor to Jack Immelt. Immelt, I mean, he won the successor to Jack Welch. Jeff Immelt became CEO. So you take Jeff Immelt, he's in his position, you start to delegate to him, and he does a great job. You promote him, and as you're delegating to him, you're giving him more responsibility. So that means he has to delegate to the person under him, and that means Jack Welch is developing Jack Immelt. He's coaching him up. He's sending him to training. He's putting him in new divisions so he can see different parts of the company. And Jeff is now taking someone under him and doing the same thing, training and developing that person to fill Jeff's spot for when he leaves. Or Jeff is delegating so that person can take on greater responsibility. So, and then the person under Jeff has to delegate to someone under him. So it's really sort of that trickle down. Uh, the CEO develops his successor, that person develops someone under him, and that person under them, and under them. And literally, you're developing an entire organization just through succession planning. And succession planning really should start on day one. That CEO comes in, he should be looking at who's going to take their place. And even if you're a family business, if you're the founder or your father or grandfather started the business, you need to be thinking about who's going to take your place when you retire. And I don't care if you retire at 80, doesn't matter. It's who are you training and developing under you. And if you just look at the cycle of that, it does so much good for everyone in the organization because No one is doing the same exact job. No one has the same skills and competencies or mindset 1 year later in a well orchestrated succession plan. It's very strategic, and it what people like to say uplifts everyone just by training one person, and that has, as I said, a trickle down effect. So, what does that have to do with your personal life? And if you smell just a little bit of a hint, you need to be thinking if you have children. See, everyone says the children are our future. Well, your children are successors to the legacy you leave behind. And in the first part of this video, I talked about how husband and wife come together to build a legacy. You're not just building and leaving money in real estate or a business. How are you developing? So yes, you could say, well, I want my children to take the business, so I have to train and develop, and they come up. They come up as leaders and they become the CEO in the future. Uh, Surprisingly, doesn't always happen as clear as people think. A lot of parents believe just by serving as an example. Now, imagine the CEO of a corporation never training and developing the people under them to come up to be a successor. And the CEO says, hey, well, I was a good CEO. I served as an example, so my example is enough, and you should just follow my example. And you never train your people. That company's in trouble. See, without a succession plan, an effective succession plan, if something happens to the CEO, then there's no one under them to take their place. And if you have a board of directors, the board of directors has to scramble and go out and find a new CEO. That's expensive. It could be disruptive. The person may not be very good and they may be fired and they have to do this again. Or if you did poor succession planning and the person under you takes your job eventually and they don't do a great job, 12 to 18 months, the board is going to say this person is out. So that's expensive, having to find another CEO. That's an expensive proposition. So succession planning and doing it effectively is important. So if you are a family person, a husband and wife, and you have children, how are you training and developing your children to take over your legacy? Do they understand money management? Are they great communicators? Are they great listeners? Do they resolve conflict? Do they understand how to find a compatible mate for themselves? Or are they just going to say, well, my mom and dad did it well, so I'll just by osmosis figure it out and try to replicate what my mom and dad did? And as opposed to training, developing, preparing them, helping them have the mindset, uh, understanding who's intellectually compatible, sexually compatible, who's compatible when it comes to raising children, integrity. There's so many things that need to be compatible. Like two companies merging is two families literally merging into one new family. And like a merged company, there's a leader. I talk about that in the other video. So yes, you train your children to take over your financial legacy. You leave them money, you leave them a business, you leave them property. But did you prepare them to lead a family? Did you prepare them to be successful with a family, or did you train them to be alone? In 20 years, they project there are going to be 5 million spinsters in the United States. That's the woman who never married and has no children. These women die alone. Just recently, I think in April, they found a woman who had been dead in her apartment for 2 years. No one knew she was dead. Some construction workers were at the top of the building and came down and they saw her lying in her bed. They saw the skeletal remains. Are you training your children to do that? I mean, we teach our daughters they don't need a man and they can do it on their own. and go get your education and a job, and it's not to you unify with a man. It is so that she can discard that man and walk and go do her own thing and say, I have my own money. She's not there to make it work. And I talk specifically in part 1 of this video about how to take those professional skills from work and make them work in your personal life. So succession planning is not just for the corporate world. Succession planning is for your personal life. How are you training and developing your children to step in your shoes and run what you left behind? How are you, and part of what you left behind is a family. So will they create a great family the way you did? Or will they create a better family? You know, children are growing up in single parent homes, and we're pretending like this is just okay and it's normal. But children who grow up with their fathers are better at solving problems. They're better at resolving conflict. They even have higher IQs. And this tells you how important it is for a father to be in a home. You know, your dad is constantly preparing children to live in a world as an adult. And fathers know that the world is not going to coddle you. So in life, there are times when things go your way. And that's when the problem solving you develop from your father becomes really important. How do you deal with life when it's not going your way? I mean, just think of this election with Donald Trump and all the college students who said they couldn't take their finals. They couldn't think because they didn't want Trump to win and they didn't get the result they wanted. So they couldn't take their finals. That's an example of poor succession planning. Here we have people who are young adults or legal adults, and they can't function when things don't go their way. How will they become leaders of a nation in the future and be able to negotiate with other countries when things are not going their way? I mean, is that going to leave us open for a country like China to come in and say, outsource leadership to China and we'll run things for you and we'll coddle you and don't worry? I mean, we'll create a weak nation. And when you have weak companies that don't thrive and yet they have a good product or service, a stronger company will come in and just take over and say, here's how things are going to go. We're running. We own you now. This is what happens in business. And to think it's not going to happen in personal life. So don't just think of succession planning for CEOs. Don't think CEOs are the only ones that need to find a successor. Everyone in the organization needs to make themselves obsolete so that they can move up and the corporation becomes better. As parents, you will make yourselves obsolete to your children as they grow up and become adults and be able to solve problems and build their own legacy. And then they too will need to implement succession planning for their children. And you can support them with their grandchildren. So I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Like, subscribe, share this video. And I'll be back with more stuff in the future. Thank you.